I'm Theodore Lee. I'm 82 years old, and this morning I wired the final payment for a 9-month world cruise for my wife Maureen and me. The money came from what my 2 children have long considered their eventual inheritance. As I clicked confirm, I felt no panic. My hand was steady. I felt only a deep, settled peace. I need to explain why. You see, I regret spending my entire life deferring joy. I treated my own happiness as a luxury, something to be funded only after everyone else's security was guaranteed. I cost Maureen and me decades. I nearly cost our children the memory of a father who knew how to live, not just provide. Let me tell you what happened. It started 6 months ago in our living room in Pine Hills. Maureen was in her chair, knitting another blanket for one of our 5 grandchildren. I was in mine, pretending to read a travel magazine. The silence between us wasn't comfortable. It was heavy. Everything was settled. Nothing was moving. We were 2 diligent, introverted people who had perfected the art of being alone, together. I felt resigned. That silence was a symptom. The proof was buried in my old desk. The next day I was looking for a spare fuse. I opened my old roll-top desk. Tucked behind my chemistry journals was a faded travel brochure for the Swiss Alps. 1973. Maureen had circled a hiking trail in pencil. We were young chemists then. We were full of dreams. We'd said, next year when we're more settled, we saved, we planned, we had children. Next year became a mantra that stretched into decades until we simply stopped saying it. Holding that brittle paper, I felt a deep regret. I saw our lives as a series of prudent postponements. But the real catalyst for change came through our son. He visited the following week. Over coffee, he was talking about his kids' college funds. He said, "We're just so grateful for your prudent financial planning. It'll be a real safety net." He meant it as a compliment. But he said it with a solemn tone, the tone of someone discussing a will. In that moment, I saw myself through his eyes. Not a father, but a vault, a reliable provider whose greatest legacy was his frugality. It was a clarifying pain. That comment echoed in the heavy silence. It forced me to look at Maureen. To truly look at her. I started watching her. I saw how her yoga was less about joy and more about maintaining. I saw how her paintings were all from photographs, never from life. Her quiet acceptance of our small world was a mirror I'd avoided. I realized I hadn't just deferred my own joy. I had been the curator of her limitations. We had built a safe, predictable life in Kent. We were its most diligent prisoners. It pained me. I couldn't bear the reflection anymore. So one Tuesday I did something utterly imprudent. I booked a 2-night stay at a historic inn on the Washington coast. No occasion, just a Tuesday. When I told Maureen, her knitting needles went still. Her face, first shock, then a flicker of fear about cost. Then, breaking through like sun after a long winter, a pure joy. It was so bright it looked like pain. She whispered, "But Theo, the children's future." And for the first time in 58 years, I gave her an answer that wasn't about tomorrow. I took her hands. "Maureen," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "What about our present?" The question hung in the air. It dissolved the old, unspoken agreement. We went to the coast. We walked on the beach in the rain. We ate chowder and talked about the Alps. The silence between us changed. It began to breathe. I felt hopeful. That weekend was a key turning in a lock rusted shut for decades. When we returned, the familiar walls of Pine Hills felt different. Back home, I didn't open my financial spreadsheet with dread. I opened it with a new purpose. For 40 years as a chemist, I'd quantified stability. Now I created a new tab. I called it the Horizon Fund. I ran the numbers, not on what we needed to leave behind, but on what we could experience while we were still here. While her knees could handle a tender boat, while my eyes could still see the blues of the Greek Sea, I felt determined. The numbers told a surprising story. We could do this. The only thing stopping us was a story we'd told ourselves for 60 years. A month after the coast, I sat at this same desk. I pulled up the cruise website. My hand was perfectly steady. I selected the suite. I picked the excursions, a painting class in Bordeaux, a yoga session on deck at sunrise for Maureen. I entered our life savings as the payment method. I took a breath. I thought of my son's solemn gratitude. I thought of my granddaughter's laugh, and I clicked confirm purchase. I felt liberated. There was no thunderclap, just a quiet certainty. The following weeks were spent not in doubt, but in a new kind of preparation. We got our passports renewed. We bought sensible walking shoes. We told the children last week. We invited them both over for Sunday dinner. I used the good china, which made Maureen raise an eyebrow, but she smiled while she did it. My son and my daughter sat at the table with their spouses. The grandchildren were playing in the living room. There was a warmth in the house, a noise that felt different. It felt like a beginning, not a quiet ending. After dessert, I cleared my throat. Maureen reached under the table and found my hand. "Your mother and I have made a decision," I said. "We've booked a trip, a long one, a 9-month world cruise." The silence that followed wasn't heavy like ours had been. It was sharp with surprise. My daughter's face lit up. "Dad, that's incredible. Where do you stop?" But my son was already doing the math in his head. I could see it, the slight frown, the quick glance at his wife. 9 months? That's quite an undertaking. Is that wise? At your age? The logistics, the cost. He didn't say the word inheritance. He didn't have to. It was there in the careful space between his words. It was in the way he said, cost. I felt a calm I hadn't expected. "It's very wise," I said. "We've run the numbers. We can afford it." My daughter was thrilled, asking about the itinerary. My son was quiet, stirring his coffee. Later, as they were leaving, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "Dad, I'm happy for you, really. It's just a shock. That's a significant portion of, well, of everything. Have you thought about the future?" I looked at him, my diligent, careful son, a chemist like his father. I put a hand on his shoulder. "An inheritance isn't just the money you leave behind," I told him, the words feeling true and solid in my mouth. "It's the life you lived in front of them. I don't want you and your sister to remember a father who was a diligent phantom. I want you to remember a man who, even at 82, learned how to live. That's the real safety net, a memory of joy. That's what lasts. He looked at me for a long moment. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Not agreement, not yet, but a crack in the story he'd always told himself about me. He hugged me, a little tighter than usual. "Okay, Dad," he whispered. "Okay." After they left, the house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet. It was full of the echo of laughter and the promise of departure. Maureen started washing the good china. I picked up a towel to dry. "You were wonderful," she said, not looking up from the sink. I was terrified, I admitted. "I know." She handed me a plate. So was I, but it's done. She looked at me then, her hands wet and soapy. "Theodore, what if they're right? What if it's too much?" I took the plate. I dried it carefully. "Then we'll have had 9 months of too much," I said, "and that will be enough." This realization, this new truth, reshaped everything. It reshaped even the small daily things we'd taken for granted. The next Wednesday, Maureen made meatloaf, a simple Wednesday night meatloaf. I went to the cupboard and took down the good china. "Theodore, really," she said, but she was already getting the crystal glasses. "Why not?" I said. "The special occasion is that we're here, together, on a Wednesday." We ate off the delicate floral patterns. We drank water from the crystal. It felt silly. It felt magnificent. After dinner, I didn't retreat to my chair. I set up my cheap watercolor set at the kitchen table. I tried to paint the hydrangea outside the window. It came out a muddy blue-gray blob. Maureen came over, drying her hands on her apron. She looked at my terrible painting. She didn't say a word. She took it, found a frame in the hall closet, and hung it right there in the kitchen, next to the calendar. That was the chemistry of it, you see. The chemistry of joy. It compounds. One small, imprudent act leads to another. The painted blob on the wall made us laugh. The laughter made the silence easier. The easier silence made us talk more about the cruise, about the Alps we never saw, about the Greek seas we would. The money we're spending isn't vanishing. It's transforming. It's turning into shared sunlight on the water we haven't seen yet. It's becoming a story we will tell each other at a small table in some foreign port. It's already the look in my wife's eyes when she tries to say thank you and just squeezes my hand instead. It's the new softness in my son's voice when he calls now, asking about visas and if we need help downloading the cruise line's app. And so we come to today, this morning. I sat at the old roll-top desk. I opened my laptop. The final payment was due. The numbers were all there in my Horizon Fund spreadsheet. A lifetime of diligence quantified into one last column. I took a deep breath. I thought of the brochure from 1973. I thought of my son's grateful, solemn tone. I thought of the muddy hydrangea painting hanging in our kitchen. I entered the routing number. I clicked confirm one last time. The screen refreshed. A message popped up. Payment processed. Bon voyage. That's when Maureen called from the other room. "Theodore, the suitcases are out. Are you going to help me, or are you just going to stare at that screen all day?" Her voice was light. It had a melody to it I hadn't heard in years. Her voice was light. It had a melody to it I hadn't heard in years. I closed the laptop. I walked into the bedroom and there they were, two large suitcases open on the bed like hungry mouths. Maureen was folding a sweater, her movements precise, the way she's always done everything. But she was humming. I stood in the doorway and just watched her. This woman, this quiet, patient woman who had circled a hiking trail in 1973 and then waited for me to remember it. The weight of it all hit me then, not as a wave, but as a slow, cold seep. It started in my chest and spread out to my fingers. "Maureen," I said. My voice sounded strange. She turned, holding one of my knit sweaters against her chest. "What's wrong? Did the payment not go through?" "It went through," I said. "That's not it." I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, next to an open suitcase. I looked at the careful piles of our life, ready to be packed away for a journey. I looked at my hands, these old chemist's hands that had measured and mixed and provided. "I've been thinking about what I said to our son," I said, "about the life lived in front of them being the real inheritance." She sat down beside me, the sweater still in her lap. "It was a beautiful thing to say, Theo." "It was," I said, "and I believe it. But here's the thing. When I look at the life I lived in front of them, what did they see?" I looked at her, and I needed her to understand this. This was the hard part, the part that came after the liberation, after the clicking of the button, the reckoning. They saw a man who came home from the lab and went straight to his desk. They saw a father who said not now to the zoo, to the camping trip, to the silly movie, because the budget was tight for the college fund. They heard next year about the Alps until they stopped asking. They saw their parents in two separate chairs, in a quiet room, for years and years. That's the life I lived in front of them, Maureen. That's the model I gave them. Diligence, deferral, silence. My voice cracked on the last word. I wasn't crying, but I felt stripped bare. Maureen was quiet for a long time. She just looked at me. Then she said very softly, "They saw a man who loved them, who provided a safe home, who never let them want for anything important. But I let us want," I whispered. It was the truest, most devastating thing I'd ever said. I let you want. I let myself want. And I called it being responsible. I picked up the sweater from her lap. It was a cable knit I'd made last winter, a complicated pattern that took months. "I spent 60 hours on this," I said. 60 hours making a sweater to sit in my chair in Pine Hills. And I told myself it was a good use of time, a productive hobby. I let it fall back into the suitcase. "Do you remember when Sarah was about 10, I asked. She wanted to go to that water park over in Tacoma. It was expensive, a ridiculous price for one day. I said no. I gave her a sensible talk about value. I took her to the community pool instead. She was good about it. She was always a good sport." Maureen nodded, her eyes glistening. I remember. I saw her face fall, just for a second, before she smiled and said the pool was fine, I said. And I told myself I was teaching her a lesson about money, about moderation. But really I was teaching her that joy is an extra. It's the optional line item in the budget. And if the budget is tight, joy is the first thing to go. I put my head in my hands. The clarity was so sharp it was a physical pain. I taught both of them that, and I taught you that. Every time you looked at a travel magazine, Every time you mentioned a gallery opening in Seattle, every time you just wanted to eat at that nice restaurant on the water, I taught you that your joy was negotiable, that it came after everything else was secured. And you learned the lesson so well, you stopped asking. That's when she cried, not sobbing, just quiet tears tracing the lines of her face that I loved so much. She didn't deny it. I thought I was being a good partner, I said, the words thick in my throat. Supportive, uncomplaining. I thought I was building something for us, a fortress. But we weren't in a fortress, Maureen. We were in a vault. And I was the one who locked the door year after year and called it safety. The room was silent then, the kind of silence that's full of everything you've never said. The suitcases lay open between us, a promise of escape from the very prison I'd built. All those paintings, I said, gesturing weakly toward the hallway where her landscapes hung. All from photographs, from books. You painted the world from a distance because I kept it at a distance for us. I made a chemist's life, contained, controlled, predictable, and I called it a good life. I finally looked at her. I was so wrong. I wasted so much time. She reached over then. She took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine, cool and firm. Theodore, she said. Her voice was steady. Listen to me. You are a good man. You are. You gave us everything you thought we needed. But not what we wanted, I said, and it was a confession. No, she agreed softly, not what we wanted. But Theo, I wanted it too. I agreed to it. Every next year, I agreed. I sat in that chair and I knitted blankets for grandchildren, and I told myself this was enough. This was the life we made. I was complicit. I built the vault with you. We sat there holding hands on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the evidence of our great escape, and faced the full, unvarnished truth of what had come before. There was no villain, just two diligent, careful people who had confused provision for living and safety for happiness. It broke me, that understanding, because there was no one to blame but the choices we made together, day after day, year after year. The weight of all those choices, of all that prudent, sensible time, settled on me. It was a crushing weight. I had done it all for love, and in doing so I had withheld the very thing love is for, the sharing of joy, right now, while you can still feel it. I'm so sorry, I said. It was all I had. She squeezed my hand. I know. So am I. We stayed like that for a long time. The afternoon light shifted across the suitcases, and slowly the crushing weight began to change. It didn't get lighter exactly. It just became something I could carry, because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. We were looking at it together. We were naming it, and that's when I began to understand the real lesson. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the cruise. It was about this moment of terrible shared clarity. This was the inheritance we should have been building all along. Not a pile of money, but the courage to look at each other and say, this isn't enough. We want more. And then to actually go get it. That's when I began to understand the real lesson. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the cruise. It was about this moment of terrible shared clarity. This was the inheritance we should have been building all along. Not a pile of money, but the courage to look at each other and say, this isn't enough. We want more. And then to actually go get it. Here's what I learned, sitting there on the bed with the suitcases. I was an excellent chemist. For 40 years, I believed the world operated on predictable formulas. Input A plus input B yields predictable result C. Diligence plus frugality yields security. Security yields happiness. It was a beautiful, logical equation. And it was completely wrong. The most important things, joy, connection, the light in my wife's eyes, don't follow formulas. They aren't yielded. They're lived. They are chosen in the moment, often in defiance of the prudent spreadsheet. I spent a lifetime perfecting the formula and forgot to ever mix the actual ingredients. I was wrong about what I was leaving my children. I thought the ultimate act of love was a seamless financial transition, an unbroken chain of security. But that's not an inheritance, that's a trust fund. An inheritance is something of you that passes on. And for years, what was passing on was my anxiety, my deferral, my belief that joy was a finish line you cross only after a lifetime of running the right race. I was leaving them a manual for a cautious life. What I want to leave them now is the sight of their mother and father, at 82 and 79, standing on the deck of a ship, squinting at a new horizon, holding hands. I want that image burned into their minds. I want it to whisper to them in their quiet living rooms, in their moments of sensible hesitation. Go while you still can. So my direct advice to you, especially if you're my age or getting close, is this. Conduct an audit, not of your finances, but of your deferrals. What's the faded brochure in your desk drawer? What's the thing you've been saying next year about for a decade? Find it. And then do the truly radical, responsible thing. Fund it. Now. Use the money you've saved. Wear the good china on a Tuesday. The special occasion is not some distant, perfect future. The special occasion is that you've survived everything life has thrown at you, and you're still here, together. That's worth celebrating with the best you have. If an 82-year-old introvert from Pine Hills, a man who found more comfort in a balanced ledger than in a bold plan, can learn this, I promise you, you have time. You have so much more time than I did. Don't let your diligence become your cage. Don't let your children's imagined future rob you of your actual present. The greatest gift you can give them is not a debt-free life, but a parent who knows how to live. That memory, that model, that's the safety net that never frays. This channel is full of stories like mine. Ordinary people figuring out extraordinary lessons sometimes too late, but sharing them just in time. If this story, this confession from an old chemist meant something to you, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe. Hit that notification bell. There are more voices here, more hard-won wisdom, and you never know which sentence might be the one that unlocks your own cage. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me, what's one thing you've been putting off? Is it a trip, a conversation, a hobby? Just saying it out loud or typing it here is the first step. And if you're feeling brave, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe your spouse, maybe a parent, maybe a friend who's also staring at a travel magazine in a quiet room. If you have a story of your own, a lesson learned the hard way, a pivot, a late found joy, There's a form in the description. The team here is always looking for real stories from real people. Yours could be the one that changes everything for someone else. A book that helped me frame some of this in my final weeks of doubt was The Gift of Years by Joan Chittister. It's not about travel or spending money. It's about the purpose and potential of growing older. I've left a link in the description if you're curious. Maureen is calling again. The suitcases won't pack themselves, and she's insisting I bring my knitting for the long sea days. My final thought as I go to join her is this: your life is not a holding pattern for someone else's future. It is the main event. Don't save the best of yourself for a finale no one is guaranteed to see. Spend it now. Spend it lavishly. Spend it on experiences that will turn into the light in your eyes, the stories in your voice, the only inheritance that truly, permanently matters. Go live.